Hi everybody, it's great to see a good turnout today. So I'm going to talk about disinformation and misinformation in a post-truth era and how we can challenge that, all right? And this talk was inspired by Nerly when Nerly asked me to talk about something, for today as part of the conversation. And, she said something cool and something interesting. Now, to a politics nerd, everything is cool, everything is interesting, and everything is relevant. But I'm glad I got that direction because Nerly is absolutely right. Okay, so, one of the most newsworthy political and social issues at the moment in this time is news itself, or rather fake news. Okay, and I think it's a testament to that Elaine ran off taking the mic with her. So, just to kind of, we're going to essentially go through this, okay? We're just going to have a chat about it. And, first of all, we're going to talk about, what is fake news? What is the nature of fake news? So a growing line of research is emerging in the political and the social sciences disciplines that addresses the various dimensions, surrounding fake news. So the patterns behind fake news diffusion, the impact of fake news, typologies of fake news, and debunking fake news, and how we can do that through academia. So there's a number of different areas coming from a multiplicity of disciplines and how we can tackle and challenge that. But we are still trying to answer the question about what fake news is. Okay, and how does it work? How does it operate? This is something we're still trying to get to terms on. Okay, so today what we're going to do is we're going to look at the two main conceptions of fake news. Okay, we're going to look at, first of all, the contested nature of fake news, and second of all, we're going to look at the increasing adoption and use of the phrase fake news as a strategic rhetorical device that is employed in political argumentation. So that co-option of that phrase, which to be honest just adds to the confusing nature of fake news in itself, okay, if it wasn't hard enough to define. So we're going to look at that, and then we're going to delve a little bit deeper into another question. So why does disinformation and fake news spread so quickly, and how can we as individuals recognize and challenge this? So political misdirection and propaganda, as Elaine mentioned, this has occurred for centuries. This can be traced back to ancient Greece. Aristotle discussed the use of red herring fallacies in attempts to dodge and deflect an opponent's arguments. So, but before the 2016 US presidential election, who had, heard of the phrase fake news? No one had heard of the phrase fake news. It had been used in some kind of narrow, kind of marginalized context in kind of shadowy bookshelves in academia, but it hadn't been, in the forefront of political and media commentary. Okay, so, it really gained a lot of traction, as a lot of us, I'm sure, are familiar with the former president, Donald Trump's, contemporary and convenient use of the phrase in order to dismiss, political opponents. So, as we note here, in 2017, the Collins Dictionary declared the phrase fake news as the word of the year, and the term's usage has risen by 365% between 2016 and 2017 itself. So that's just 1 year. That is absolutely massive. Okay, so in 2018, so I remember giving a talk in 2018 about this, which was terrifying because nothing was known about it at the time. As I remember, a Google search, it brought up 5 million results. Okay, so that is just showing the absolute, how much this has gained traction. This week, I had another little Google search, and it was 3.8 billion results. So that's just to give an idea of the extent and of the usage of the term, and I suppose the questions that remain around it, and also the challenges that this poses for us. But most importantly, the one thing it does is it makes, I suppose, us realize that this is not just a phase. This is not just a fad. This is not just a buzzword that's going to go away. This is something that we're stuck with, and we need to essentially learn how to handle, both at the individual, the cultural, and also the structural level. So fake news is applied in a number of settings, to a range of activities, a range of issues, everything from programmatic advertising, from hoax websites, from deep fakes, from propaganda, conspiracy theories, satirical and parody sites, fabrication, manipulation, electoral disinformation, and I could go on. Okay, so this is one of the reasons that it comes down to things being so hard to pin down, to identify. But when we examine fake news, what we have is we can identify two aspects. So the first aspect that I want to address is fake news as a contested theme. Okay, so the very contested nature of fake news is actually what it has come to be defined as. Okay, so in both academia and in mainstream media, public discourse debates continue around the usage of the term. The ultimate question is, despite, I suppose, the different kind of meanings and approaches and angles that are taken to fake news and what it means, like I just outlined, is it simply a buzzword, as some people argue? Is it a catch-all phrase that essentially, through its overuse, has been rendered useless or meaningless? I think that's a question I kind of want everyone to reflect on. And that brings us to the second conception of fake news. So fake news as a rhetorical strategy. Okay, so my area of interest particularly is in political argumentation. Okay, and this vague and contested and ambiguous nature of the phrase fake news has actually rendered it vulnerable to being co-opted, to being hijacked and manipulated by political actors as a rhetorical device and a discursive strategy to delegitimize their political opponents, but also, as we've seen, rally their political bases. Okay, so Farkas and Shu, who've done quite a bit around the politicization of fake news, they argue that the term has become an increasingly one that is, as they call it, a floating signifier. Okay, so instilled with different meanings, fake news now becomes a key moment in what is part of a much larger, as they say, hegemonic struggle, okay, to define, to shape the purpose and the meanings of contemporary politics as we know it, as we practice it, and how we understand it in our personal and our daily lives. So fake news is also, importantly, it's used to undermine trust, okay, with institutions and established structures that we have put our faith in for many, many years. Like labeling mainstream media, for example, as fake news, it casts doubt on certain stories, and it seeks to undermine trust in information and shake trust in the media system and the structure of mainstream and mass media as a whole. Okay, so this is just the questions, I suppose, these are the two questions and the two conceptualizations of fake news. So, as we mentioned, it's a very, very kind of broad term. So I want to pick a quote by Makomsky here. So Makomsky really looks at the nature of fake news. We could spend hours talking and debating about the various attempts to define it. But I've chosen this quote specifically because it addresses the nature of fake news and addresses how fake news operates, specifically in the context of mis- and disinformation, which we'll look at in just a second. So Makomsky states, fake news is an insidious form of post-truth rhetoric, and social media exponentially increases the problems of misinformation and narrow-mindedness. For an ever-growing number of people who get their information online, social media platforms both feed content that viewers already agree with and encourage social grouping, limiting encounters with different ideas that may challenge settled beliefs. Okay, so I think this is a really important quote because really what it does is addresses the nature of fake news within the context that we so often find it occurring in, which really is in social media systems. Okay, but so bringing that back, Makomsky touches on the word misinformation. Okay, and we're hearing a lot of different versions around fake news. We're talking about misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, this infodemic, all of these really interesting terms that have kind of converged around this phenomenon of fake news and inaccuracies, essentially, in our daily lives and how we understand them. So just to take apart, what is misinformation, what is disinformation, and how are they similar or different to one another, okay? So the difference between our conceptualizations of fake news can be looked at through this lens of mis and this lens of disinformation, okay? So misinformation is false information, okay, that is shared but no harm is meant. So we're looking at this really through the role of intention, okay? Disinformation is when false information is knowingly shared to cause harm, okay? And malinformation, it's also when genuine information is shared, for example, to cause harm, kind of like leaked into the public realm, so often by using information that is designated to stay private into the public sphere. So while these two terms, I'm sure we've seen them, they're often used interchangeably. They're not, although used kind of to replace one another, they're not synonyms. okay? And I think that's really important because misinformation refers to the inaccurate reporting that stems from inaccuracies, okay? The term doesn't imply an intent to deceive. So disinformation, on the other hand, it refers to the intentional spread of inaccurate information with the intent to deceive. So for example, what we could say is disinformation is always misinformation, while misinformation may be disinformation depending on the intent. So really it's underpinned by that idea of intent. And you know what? Rhetorical strategy, often in the case of political argumentation, for example, is a deliberate attempt to mislead and deflect and can be therefore considered as a form of disinformation. So, moving on to planned disinformation, okay? So in this case, we're going to look a little bit more deeply into disinformation, okay? Especially as it relates to a very, very contemporary, discussion that's unfolding around us. So there's a lot of reasons as to why fake news spreads so quickly. Most significantly, these issues, they do not exist in isolation. We are fighting fake news and disinformation, in an age of convergence. And the question really is what is convergence? So convergence of different types of media and social media platforms, we have moved from an era of mass communication to mass self-communication. And in this case, convergence culture, as noted by Jenkins, who coined the term, it refers to the flow of content across multiple media platforms, multiple media sites, this cooperation between multiple media industries, but also importantly, the migratory behavior of the media audience. So for example, how many people signed up to TikTok since the beginning of the pandemic? TikTok rose in user ownership by over 70%. That is the migration of a media audience to a different platform. Okay, and that's really, really interesting, I suppose, if we're analysing the nature and the behaviours of social media usage. So that is that kind of migratory pattern of people kind of moving between various different platforms for whatever reason. Okay, so on the right we have a picture advertising pandemic indoctrination. Has anyone heard of the term pandemic? Please stick up your hands so I have an idea. Brilliant. Okay, so this term pandemic has come up quite a bit in the last year, and this pandemic is a 26-minute documentary, okay, that blamed the coronavirus outbreak on Big Pharma, on Bill Gates and the World Health Organization. And this really is what we call a product of planned disinformation. This exploded on social media in 2020. This happened, in the case of a month, in just a few days, in about 5 to 6 days. The false COVID-19 claims of a discredited research scientist and a conspiracy theorist spread to millions via YouTube and via Facebook and other video sharing sites. So we're going to look a little bit more when we're talking about addressing, disinformation, how it spreads and the ways in which it spreads. We're going to have a look at what things that I would kind of work a lot with at the moment. And what is this beauty? What is this? I'm in my element here. This is a network graph. Okay, so this is right here what we're witnessing. This is the convergence of different types of fake news. Okay, so as planned disinformation. This is what happens when a vaccine-resistant movement, conspiracy theories, and a politicized term like fake news collide in the middle of a global pandemic. Okay, so this is also across multiple online channels, so bringing that role of convergence, but not just that role of convergence on media channels, but also that role of convergence across different kind of political arenas and different kind of political, discourse. So this is the online activity that occurred in just 1 month around pandemic. Okay, so this was created by Aaron Gallagher, and it's composed of 37,725 URLs. So that's online posts on social media, mainly Facebook, during that period of time. And these are all these little dots that we see here. These are URLs. Okay, so these are just websites. Okay, and Erin used data. She's 2 databases from CrowdTangle, and CrowdTangle is a software tool. Okay, so it is a program that's used to monitor social media behavior, and it's quite open to academics at the moment because we're trying to learn more and more about fake news, about the spread of disinformation, and maybe electoral manipulation. Okay, so this was used by Erin, who's also a fantastic multimedia illustrator, as well as a data visualization analyst, to essentially use these different data sets for comparison, but also to, I suppose, create, a visualization of this spread. Okay, so the larger, visible labels, so the ones in a close-up here, like official QAnon, these are Facebook groups with tens of thousands of members. Okay, so highly active groups. And these groups, what we see, they are the central hubs within the network. The graph contains links to YouTube and other links to other websites, such as Facebook, but mainly what we see is the links to YouTube are the most common URLs, which makes sense because pandemic is a video. Okay, so what does this image tell us, apart from the fact that data visualizations are really pretty? Data science can be absolutely excellent when it comes to identifying these patterns. So these patterns of behavior, but also even potentially predicting fake news. Okay, fake news trends, and data visualizations can also be very helpful in illustrating how this happens. So this is actually like looking at this and how it unfolds in front of our very eyes. So how did it spread so quickly? Okay, we're going just to, I suppose, move on to these deliberate groups. Okay, so what we see is pandemic, and we see, I suppose, this deliberate spread of misinformation and the sharing of disinformation. Okay, but once again, the plot of pandemic is a convergence of various contemporary, conspiracy theories and political groupings, which is why it appealed to such a wide audience during this time. The video spread from YouTube to Facebook, thanks to highly active QAnon, conspiracy-related Facebook groups with tens of thousands of members, which caused an absolutely massive cascade. And both platforms were recognized as instrumental in spreading viral medical misinformation. Okay, but the narrative of individual responsibility, it still dominates. Okay, so we tend to see kind of, I suppose, a binary when it comes to looking at who is responsible for dealing with fake news. We see these nameless, faceless culprits. Okay, so we see, internet and social media platforms, tech giants, bots, micro-targeting, algorithms, and essentially it's very, very easy just to kind of switch off and just recognize this as just some kind of black hole, really, of information that we have no control over. But also then, it's really important that we look a little bit more critically at this and recognize the human aspect of this. So what is the human face? There's often a tendency to focus on true groups, like the one that we just saw there. So these Facebook groups, these social media groups, and we tend to look at, I suppose, the people then who share it. So for example, us, the people in this room. And it's that question about, the people, I suppose, who, are often portrayed as gullibly just, taking in this information and sharing it without really looking at it in more detail. But it's not as simple as that. Okay, what we really need to look to is the people who directly enable the propagation of disinformation. So for example, marketing, brands, social media companies. Okay, so this is really important because these are the people who may not necessarily intend to deceive, but are still responsible for the propagation of fake news. Disinformation is not simply a side effect of the attention economy that can alone be countered with third-party fact-checking or other innovative tools or measures, which is currently really being promoted at the moment. It is an industry unto itself, and if money can be made, really, from the production of fake news, it will continue to flourish. So social media platforms do need to shoulder the responsibility, but we also need to recognize reliable, websites and others that use clickbait, advertising. So you go onto, an article, for example, on the Irish Times or the Independent. What we see is, that those little kind of graphs of, how to get the bikini body, or Carlow mum lost 20 stone, this is how you can do this too, or all this kind of thing. These are algorithms, okay? And these are forms of fake advertising that are being paid during ad tech space, okay? So what we're saying is really ads fund a significant portion of the internet. But if you can create doubt, and this is something that we're witnessing in a very highly politicized and polarized environment at the moment, in an attention economy, if you can create doubt by grabbing a user's attention through clicking something, just one click, but grabbing that user's attention just for a couple of seconds, you can then sell that attention to others. Okay, and once again, in this political climate, there become financial incentives for false advertising about politics. Disinformation can be viewed as the new currency for those businesses, and it lends itself to a unique contradiction where websites of reputable news sources, for example, Bloomberg and the LA Times, are battling misinformation while also simultaneously profiting from it. Okay, so What is being done right now? We have the OSMR bill that's going through the Dáil na Seanad, so that's the Online Safety, Media and Regulation Bill. There are issues with that, but we are working our best to try and get that done. But also, you know, there is no doubt that the era of self-regulation by social media giants must end. It's neither feasible nor sustainable, and questions around this precise definition of harmful online content, you know, have been raised by the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission, the Irish Council for Civil Liberties, who are really, really stressing the need for a very much an independent media commissioner. Okay, so essentially, that said though, challenging and debunking information and disinformation at an interpersonal and an intergroup level is absolutely critical in bringing to the fore these issues related to tackling information disorder in civil society. So that's where we come in. Okay, everyone in this room, everyone in this college, you know, the Reuters, they released a digital media report in Ireland for 2019, which found that 61% of Irish media consumers are concerned about what is real and what is fake on the internet. And that is considerably higher than the European average of 51%. As Jonathan Swift said in 1710, falsehood flies and truth limps, comes limping after it. So structurally, you know, social media platforms and companies have a lot to answer and they need to take action. But for us, as individuals, media and political literacy is the literacy of the 21st century, and it's just becoming that way. So what we really need to do at an individual level is we need to recognize it. Recognize what disinformation is, recognize what misinformation is, understand how we can report it, but lastly, challenge it at that intergroup level, at that interpersonal level, because that has huge value. And I understand during COVID-19, we're all pretty burnt out, we're all pretty tired, we don't want to start, you know, arguments with those, you know, people either in our families who are spreading or kind of, you know, I suppose, consuming disinformation. But it's just to bring us back to McComsky's quote at the beginning, you know, about how social media platforms contribute to limiting encounters with different ideas that may challenge set beliefs. But we can't take control over algorithms, but we can control what we say in person. And I think that's really the issue, is if we know how to, you know, identify fake news, we consider the source, we read beyond, we check the author, we check the date, we question, okay, is it satire? Check your biases, most importantly, and then just, you know, consult experts, so go to, you know, different aspects. But essentially, you know, in relation to speaking up, it does matter. It is really, you might not convince people. Okay, you might not convince people, that's fine, that might not be the goal. The main thing that you can accomplish is that others see you push back. You're contributing to an alternative narrative. They will get accurate information and they'll see you calmly, maturingly, like responding to false statements. But it also erodes the bystander effect, which is, you know, typically used to explain people who are less likely to help in emergency if other people are around. Speaking against disinformation and misinformation is contagious in a good way. Okay, so if you do it, other people who are witness to this realize that they can and they should too. And if they didn't know what to say before, they can copy and paste what you said. Okay, but each of the talks that we've heard today can be argued as political in nature. We looked at queer theology, as Michael touched on. We looked at questions of representation, of structure and agency, like Derek spoke of. And we also looked at propaganda, and we looked at, you know, enlistment, as Elaine mentioned. And I think it's really important to recognize that politics is everywhere. Politics is structural, but also, really importantly, it's personal. And I think this really, I suppose, situates the role of, you know, staff and students at Carlow College St. Patrick's. It is our responsibility to counter this narrative. It's our responsibility to challenge dis and misinformation, but also to offer an alternative perspective and lead in challenging disinformation. And if anyone has any questions, you know, don't hesitate, send me an email and we can chat about it and nerd out a little bit more.